And here we go. We are online, guys. Welcome to the Unlimited Realities event. We have now Warsaw Singularity University chapter. Welcome.
Oh, welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us. Hello, everyone. It's really great to see you. And greetings from Warsaw. My name is Jowita Michalska. I'm Singularity Warsaw Chapter Ambassador and at the same time CEO of Digital University. We are an NGO and a company. As an NGO, we work with underprivileged young women and kids. And as a company, we work with different organizations, helping them equip their employees with competences of the future, broadly speaking. I'm honored to host this session, Singularity Warsaw Chapter, The New World Disorder, and I'll be with you for the next 70 minutes. So let me share a few insights. Yuval Harari says, if you want to know the future, you have to understand the past. So I want you to imagine you're in a time machine and let's go back around 100 years to the past. It's 1920. As you probably don't remember, 1920s began in a house. Cataclysmic disruption resulting from the First World War and the Spanish flu shattered businesses and provoked xenophobia. There were a lot of technological inventions like the radio, refrigerator, vacuum cleaner, moving assembly line, and electronic power transmission. They all generated new growth, even as the wealth gap widened. T-shaped economy appeared. More than 2/3 of Americans and Europeans survived on wages too low to sustain everyday living. On the other hand, there was a lot of scientific innovations, like the discovery of insulin, the first modern antibiotics, and insights into theoretical physics and the structure of atoms. All of these incredible things forced people to reconsider their beliefs. The enormous scale of change and the great uncertainty that came with it produced two different fractions. Those who wanted to reverse time and return to the normal world, they get used to. And those who embraced the chaos, faced forward, and started building the future. Do you think it sounds familiar? I think yes. So let's go back to the present. It's difficult not to see parallels to our modern world. Tumultuous elections in US, extreme weather events all around the world, and of course COVID-19 that affected the whole world, continue to test our resilience. We also have exponential technologies like artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, autonomous robots, mixed realities, and off-planet mission to space. All of this is challenging our assumptions about human potential. And of course, we've been under lockdown for a lot of time. Under lockdown, we've learned how to work from our kitchens and lead from our bedrooms. We also learned to miss things that were normal, like, for example, going for lunch and going to the cinema. We learned to support each other from a distance, and different things became important for us. But believe it or not, it's just the beginning of disruption. What is the good thing? The good thing that we can all choose this path of reinvention. Few hundreds of new technology and science trends has appeared this year. I don't know if you noticed that, but you probably did. That is why we should discuss the disruptive forces. We should discuss opportunities. We should talk about strategies that will drive us and our businesses into near future. Now more than ever, we should examine the potential near and long-term impact of tech trends. We must include it into our strategic thinking for not only the coming year, for at least next 10 years. And we should adjust our planning, our operations, and business models But I hope we'll also make some time for creative exploration. I think a new world will come from chaos, and it will be not exactly the new order, but this will be the new world disorder. So what is important to look for now? It's important to learn. Education is important. You can name it: lifelong learning, self-learning, reskilling, upskilling, bite-sized learning, flipped classroom learning, social learning. We all know that everyone should dedicate at least 1 hour a week to educate. You're probably familiar with the fact that Bill Gates reads 52 books a year, which is 1 book a week. That's challenging. We also need to work on our human potential, like empathy, love, creativity, critical thinking, vulnerability, learning to ask questions, which is also very important. Among top 10 competences by World Economic Forum, by the way, there are creativity, emotional intelligence, and cognitive flexibility, but also having design mindset. We also need to learn about technology. Let's not forget about technology. Every one of us should be digital transformation expert or specialist as a second job today. Dan Ariely, whom I'm a big fan of, asked once Yuval Harari, what advice would Harari give young students in university as they're preparing for the future of jobs? And you know what Harari said? He said, I have no idea. And I think nobody really have any idea what the job market would look like in, let's say, 20, 30 years. So now, but nobody really can tell you what you need to study today or what you need to learn today. We just don't know. For the first time in history, we have no idea what the job market would look like. There might be new jobs, definitely. But it's not that all jobs will disappear, but we just don't know what these jobs will be. Really necessary skill for the young person in 21st century is to be able to constantly change and reinvent yourself, because the world will not set in any particular pattern. People thought that life was divided into 2 main parts. The first part of life, you mainly learn and gain skills and knowledge at schools. And then in the second part of life, you mainly make use of the knowledge and skills that you've gained. But this is not a solid view of life. In order to stay relevant, you will have to change and to really reinvent yourself again and again and again. And so let me finish this part with Peter Diamandi's quote. We hear from him very often. Better learn to surf on top of this tsunami instead of being crushed by it. By the way, if you want to see Peter speaking together with such names like Professor Andrew McAfee or Elon Musk's mother, Maya Musk, and many more, please join us on Masters and Robots conference. We organized 21st and 22nd of October, and I have to assure you that we'll have discounts for our community. We also run a speaker's office, international one. So if you want to join us or as a speaker or invite a speaker, please let us know. We work with names like David Hansen from Hansen Robotics, with Yuval Harari, and many, many more experts from around the world. So let me now introduce our next speaker, Christina Dolan. I'm so happy to introduce Christina to you. Christina is a multi-potentialist. She's an engineer, computer scientist, entrepreneur, and MIT alumna. She's passionate about advanced technologies, including blockchain, cybersecurity, data. Formerly, she held executive roles at companies like Disney, Hearst, IBM, Oracle. She's recognized as an industry thought leader. She's often engaged as a speaker and has received numerous honors, including, let me just name a few: 100 Women in Finance, Women to Watch in Crypto and Blockchain, 100 Most Influential Blockchain Women, many, many more. And what's also very important, she recently co-authored a book, Transparency in ESG and the Sustainable Economy, capturing opportunities through data, which will be published later this summer. And this is the topic Christina will talk about, sustainable leadership. Christina, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jowita. And once again, you're one of my readers for this book. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak. This is a huge opportunity. And this is a topic that I'm somewhat passionate about. When I first embarked on writing this book, I had actually, at one point in my career, headed up, was a product manager for an institutional training platform around data. And so when the publisher asked if I would be interested in writing this book, which I ended up co-authoring, I thought, how difficult could it be to write a book on sustainability and ESG, which is a sustainability term. And part of the reason why I use this picture is there's so many terms. It's so confusing, means so many different things to different people. But ESG means environment, social, and governance. And we'll talk a little bit about this, this space that's become so popular, but yet there's all these terms and acronyms and people don't really understand its true meaning, which is risk. It is the risk that hopefully through my presentation you'll get to appreciate, because it's not a risk that shows up on a financial statement. It's a risk that has to do with the world that we live in and the fact that we're all connected with technology and we're dependent on other people and other organizations. So let me take you through this. I'm going to share with you, hopefully you'll have a little bit more of understanding of all these terms. And, while it's a very big topic, but it has some interesting history that you should understand and how we kind of got to the point where this is such a critical topic. And then I'm going to share my thoughts in terms of what it takes to be a sustainable leader. So, so there are many different lenses in sustainability, and we've all heard about, climate, because that's the sustainability of our planet and what's going to happen, when there's 11 billion people at the end of the century. But I'm talking about something much, much more immediate to us. And this has to do with organizations. And I'm going to take you through why this is so important. So you've heard a lot about companies self-reporting, and they do it in a variety of different ways. I'm going to talk about that. And there are a million different investor frameworks. But one of my areas, which I'm very passionate about, is cyber risk. And hands down, cyber risk is the most immediate, most impactful financial risk that an organization faces. And it's part of sustainability. As a matter of fact, Marriott would have actually gone out of business had its breach after the regulations were in place in California. So this is a very complex space, has many different vectors, and we're all tied into each other through some form of entities that need to be managed and led with sustainability. So what does sustainability mean, right? So we think about organizations and companies, and it has employees and investors, and the sustainability of an organization is really thought of as being about the owners themselves and the employees, but it's far more than that, right? So you have partners, suppliers, and customers, and they're all in these ecosystems, which technology is tying together through networks and data, right? So, for example, when a Lehman Brothers has a systemic risk, it not only affects the employees and the investors and partners and suppliers, like the whole industry, it affects the community, right? Because people can no longer afford maybe the schools or local services, so it has a huge systemic impact, right? And cyber is one area that people don't even think about in terms of this whole sustainability, but yet in fact the ability to impact this huge audience with one breach is massive. So kind of going back to the company, today we live in a world where companies are bigger than countries, right? By GDP, right? When you compare them, and they're more powerful, and through Metcalfe's law and connectivity, their power to engage is probably much greater than world leaders. So if our largest organizations and even our smallest organizations aren't being led with sustainability, this presents some issues, right? So, I mean, even the small store that's in a small town that provides milk and diapers and goes out of business, there's a sustainability aspect to that as well. So having sustainable leadership that really thinks about all of these components together and not just one or two is really, really important. So I'm going to quickly, in the book, we talk a little bit about this because I think it's really important. This whole concept of corporate social responsibility has sort of evolved as corporations have evolved and become a bigger part of our lives. The first industrial revolution saw a lot of people moving from farming into factories, changed the way they lived, their families. It had huge impact, and this was the rise of the corporation. Then you had the second industrial revolution, which also machinery, the Gilded Age. Then you started having organizations and companies that now started thinking about, corporate social responsibility and modern philanthropy. So after the World War II, you saw a lot more of an emphasis by organizations, and you started seeing, after the third industrial revolution, you saw things like civil rights, and you see a lot more of an interest between, communities and organizations, but companies are a big part of the network in our lives, right? So how they behave and what's going on in those organizations and their employees and their partners is a very much of fabric of the sustainability of our world. So then in the 80s, you had the Exxon oil spill, and that was actually monumental. And that's when climate started coming into this corporate social responsibility. So what's been really interesting is over the course of the last 2 decades, the amount of interest that has grown. And of course, we have the UN Millennium Goals that sort of evolved in the Global Compact, and most recently in 2015 became the SDGs or UN Sustainability Goals. But you also had a lot more visibility from Wall Street. You had the Paris Agreement for climate change that came more recently. And this term of ESG, which is environment, social, and governance, started to evolve, right? And so the science around the data and the metrics, which are very complex, is still rather young. So ESG is environment. So a lot of what you've heard about sustainability is really pretty much in this category. But when you think about social, right, you're thinking about the human capital, the people that make your product, buy your product. You're thinking about the supply chain. We've heard a lot about the recent hacking over the course of the last year with respect to supply chain and hospitals, right? When data is stolen, it affects both the company and the employees and the people in the ecosystem. And then, of course, governance is very important because governance is basically what leads the direction of an organization. It builds that culture, and that's where you set your data governance, your cybersecurity, your board governance, right? So it's interesting because there are companies like Tesla and Elon Musk, right? He's saving the planet, right? But he gets criticized because one of the things that happened over the course of the last few years is that he would tweet things and he got in trouble with the SEC. So there were material financial impacts on the shareholders. There are fees that had to be paid as a result of that. So this is a complex space. It has many different components, but all of these are elements of risk that organizations have to manage in order to be a sustainable organization. So there have been a lot of organizations that have evolved to create metrics and guidelines and frameworks around this space. I mean, SASB is one you may have heard a bit about because that's one that's being used by publicly held companies. You've got the UN Sustainability Goals, which are about things like poverty and water and education. These are about goals for the planet, the sustainability of the planet, right? CERIS evolved into what is GRI, and GRI is one of the most popular reporting mechanisms. And GRI is really about how the company affects the world, and SASB is about how the world affects companies. And so, unfortunately, all these different groups look at things from a very different lens. But last September, they all came together and said that they want to have a more unified view in terms of their metrics around this very complex and important category. So here's where we talk about the people side of it. And it's interesting because I see a lot of large organizations, and they'll hire sort of what I call like an ambassador for corporate social responsibility. And they're very good at amplifying sort of the do good motto of the organization. But really, in order to be a sustainable organization, you really have to embed that into the DNA. You have to create a corporate culture, and that starts at the governance, at the board, at the organization, and then gets implemented, through dealing with environmental issues and making sure that social issues are within this governance and corporate culture. And so you need people and leaders who really understand that the legal contract should have words in it that maintain the sustainability of an organization. So when people are selected as the chief sustainability officer and they don't have the ability to impact, the agreements with other stakeholders, or the rules that create the DNA in an organization, and there isn't an ability to collect data, measure, manage, change, and constantly evaluate, then you're really not building in the ability to learn and create a sustainable organization. It's a very complex space, and I'm not going to go into every single detail on it, but it requires tremendous communications and real understanding of the particular industry and business that you're in order to be able to understand the risks, for that particular industry, be able to measure, as I said, things like supply chain. There's a whole variety of different activities that need to be involved and woven into this sustainability fabric that should be part of every organization. And sustainability is also about survival. It's about being agile, right? I have to say that, with respect to cyber risk, when you don't have the right governance, a lot of small companies go out of business in 6 months. So adapting, learning, and building sustainability into the fabric of an organization is incredibly important. And it requires the participation of all of the stakeholders, especially from the top of an organization. So one of the reasons why you're hearing a lot about sustainability is because sustainability means value. It means that your community will buy your product. I mean, you're hearing now about organizations that are getting boycotted because of some political statement they've made, right? And investors. And so, the investment community is saying that up to 60% of investors are not going to invest in organizations that aren't sustainable. And that makes sense, right? Because you want an organization that can pivot, communicate, has woven sustainability into the fabric of the organization, because it is a part of our communities and our livelihoods. When you look into these components and you realize that you can't get an employee to come in and build the intellectual property in your organization, and you won't get vendors that will work with you, or suppliers or partners or community engagement if you're not a sustainable company. And on the value side of your organization, investors are now looking for metrics and trying to understand, is this a sustainable organization? And it's not just about the ethical aspects, it's about all of the governance and all of the social and all of the environmental aspects. And so communications are probably the most important aspect of implementing, sustainable leadership. You have to create KPIs and messaging, and you have to embed that into every single layer of an organization. And so there's a lot of pressure in organizations right now because, obviously ESG and sustainability are very popular words. Their investors are rewarding organizations that are well run, that are sustainable, that are doing the right thing for their organizations. And so as a result of that, there's a lot of pressure in organizations to try to communicate that they're doing the right thing. Their investors, their customers, the international community, advocacy organizations. But what's really difficult, and I have a friend who has an organization that tries to sell just organic products. It's really hard to get that information so that she's able to communicate to her own customer set that she's done the due diligence to make sure that there isn't this greenwashing, as they call it, where they sort of pretend that they're a sustainable organization. And when it comes to reporting, there are so many different mechanisms by which to report. As I said before, GRI is the most popular, and especially in Europe, it's about the impact of the company on the world. And then you look at something like SASB, which is used like publicly held companies, and that's more about the world's impact on a company. Is it sustainable? Can it pivot when there's a COVID crisis? Can it deal with cybersecurity? Does it have the employees that are required to build their product? Are they able to attract them? And so when it comes to reporting and data, I mean, Wall Street is actually, there's a lot of innovation in this space right now. But what's interesting is that these data sets, some of them are proprietary, and the analysis and frameworks are very different. So organizations seem to have a very different view on these different data types. So for example, some analysts will look at Tesla and say they're saving the planet from the ESG, the environment, they're doing a great job. But from the governance perspective, he had these huge fines. So there's some analysts that'll say, oops, no, not well governed. They buy social media sentiment and find out that they have a lot of employee turnover. And so as a result of that, it's very difficult for them to maintain the employees that are required for intellectual property building. So the data is very varied in terms of what organizations use and evaluate in their frameworks. So when you take all these complex layers that have so many different vectors and so many different sources, and then you try to put them into frameworks, ratings, indexes, funds, investors, you can see that why there are so many different views in terms of sustainability of organizations. Unfortunately, unlike the regulated bond ratings, where you have a very strong, well-defined structure around risk for bonds, in this whole sustainability space, there's a lot of variability, not only in the data and where it comes from and how it's sourced, and are they looking in the future? Are they looking in the past? There's also a variety of different ways of doing the analysis. So whether it be the issuer, the rating agency, the index provider, the funds, the ESG investor, there's many data inconsistencies. So you're going to get a variety of different views. But what is very interesting is that the sustainability and ESG flows during this COVID crisis have increased substantially. And, as a result of the fact that COVID reminded us of how important it is to have companies that are well run, that are sustainable, that are able to provide the services to their customers, that are able to provide jobs for their employees, even though they have to work from home. This was a huge digital transformation accelerator. And if you can see, I mean, the increases in the United States and in Europe have been enormous, and it looks like this trend is continuing. So it's important also to note that, as well as all these different data sources, the way that sustainability is defined is very different depending upon whose lens you're looking at, right? So negative streaming might be something that someone uses on a dashboard on investment tool and basically says, I don't want any companies that are involved in, selling guns or ammunition, or you might have values-based. Best in class is a very popular one for sustainability. So, for example, BP that had that terrible crisis in the Gulf, that BP is still considered a good investment, because after that huge disaster, they have improved their governance to the point where they're considered best in class. So investors will still invest in categories that are not necessarily environmentally friendly, but they're part of our ecosystem. And so they'll pick the best in class based upon their governance and social responsibility within that environment. And then, of course, you have single focus investments where there's like there's like a fund that's totally focused on companies that have a woman at the C level, right? That's a very narrow definition of sustainability. So I'll leave you with the thought that governance is probably one of the most important aspects of driving sustainability. It's a very, very complex space. It has many, many, many different dimensions. But I think that you can see that even though through this complexity, it's incredibly important for organizations, which are such an important component of the fabric of the world that we live in terms of our own personal sustainability, in terms of services and jobs and finances. And there are many different components to this sustainability. So in terms of leadership, governance is incredibly important. And there's many, many different aspects of that. And through this governance and the culture that's created, leaders are able to create sustainable organizations. And so with that, I leave you with my last thought here. So I'm switching back.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Christina. I'm especially happy with the presentation, because I fully believe that this topic is rising, is becoming more and more important, and that's great that we're talking about it, especially this year. So let me now move to another element of our discussion today, which is Firechat, and we will go deeper in the topic of New World Disorder. I have the pleasure to moderate the panel, and my three guests are Christina Dolan, whom you already met, Suprit Singh Manchanda, technologist, Silicon Valley investor and managing director of Riven Capital. Hello, Suprit.
Hello.
Nice to have you with us. And Dariusz Jemierniak, lecturer at the Harvard University and Koźmiński University, member of the Wikimedia Foundation and founder of Instalink. Hello, Dariusz.
Hi, how's it
going? I'd like to start with a question I think everyone is asking today, but I'm really interested in your answers. On one hand, technology is making our lives incredibly efficient. However, after more than a year in this new normal, we see that employees complain of being overwhelmed by all the remote work. So the question is, will remote work, from your perspective, be more advantageous in the near future? Will organizations provide more flexibility and maybe feeling of security for its employees? How do you see the coming future, the nearest future? Dariusz, can we start with you?
Absolutely. And when you're asking whether I think it will be positive or negative, I cannot have a straight answer. It's both. Very obviously, organizations are going to definitely exploit the possibilities, but exploit in both meanings. And they're going to probably take advantage of some employees in some cases. And we know there's this surveillance capitalism, this enormous drive to use technology to basically observe people and streamline their work, like in the Taylor times. However, I still think many companies will try to embrace the very potential of letting people be more flexible, do remote work if they want, enable them to make use of technology. And I think what is really amazing is that it's a huge opportunity. My fear here is, though, that we over-focus on the negatives that are here and now. So we are all constrained. We do not have the home office. We are frustrated by being in a lockdown for a year. So we assume that remote work is a nuisance. I would say, in a way, it is a huge opportunity for all of us, for the employees, for the employers, but only if both parties can take full advantage of the opportunity. So if it's not just putting the cost, transferring the cost to the employees, or it's not just saying, oh yes, I know, we just do remote work, do not show up anymore, we'll save some money on the office. No, not at all. I think, in my view, remote work could be even more costly than having a well-established office in place. However, it will allow people to reach their full potential, to basically live richer and better lives if they want to. So I think what is key here is flexibility, finding modalities in which we will be able to communicate, we'll be able to onboard new people, we'll be able to do mentoring, do all those things which are extremely difficult. And we know they do not really work well without those modalities, without the new approaches to solving the particular organizational problems that have to be solved. And my view on this is that we are all in overdrive. Organizations have switched into survival mode. They've been organizing for a couple of months, thinking about this passing pandemic, we'll get back to normal. As you said, it's perfectly worded. It's a new world disorder, and we'll never get normal again. It's a new abnormal. We need to get to this particular mode and realize that we will not get to what was then. And it's both good and bad. In the sense that it's bad, we need to find new ways of solving particular problems. And I think this is the biggest challenge of this year, of this decade, and for organizations of the future, it will be key to realize how to solve them.
Thank you, Darek. Supri, do you agree or disagree? What's your point of view?
So think of it from a time continuum. We were most comfortable. So humans we love to be comfortable. And here's the problem. Change is something we don't embrace very well. Why are we changing? Why do I have to do this? I give you a simple example. You drive to work every day before COVID. You used to drive to work. If there was some road construction, then you had to go around the road, then you get very angry, you get there, you have a bad mood. So our patterns are about creating comfort. Two things happen. What we thought was going to happen in a 10-year span got compressed, into months. That compression, okay, we were excited. I don't have to get in the car and drive and be stuck in traffic and spill my coffee on myself, all of that stuff. But then what happened is that the other element of who we are became important, the social element. So whether we like it or not, we do not have a coffee cooler place where we can congregate and talk and say, hey, Cristina, how was your weekend? What's going on? And she tells you the story, the dog ran away. They had to go get him back. He brought a friend. That social element changes us. Now, the positives, look at us. We are talking across geographies, time zones, everything, what I call the death of distance. There's no distance here. It's like we're sitting in each other's living room, and if we get the right drink, we will have fun doing that. Now, see, every time I say that, somebody drinks. Here's the other part of that. That flexibility also disrupted all our patterns, to what Darius was saying. And is this going to behave like a pendulum? It's going to swing. Some company is going to say, okay, everybody become flexible. Somebody's going to say, no, everybody come back. And the pendulum is going to swing until we find a new modality. In this modality, so the positives, The fact that we can connect together, the fact we can mentor people online is really important. The negatives, I'm waking up at 1 a.m. to talk to people in China or wherever else, we became a 24-hour circle. And at some point, we start putting technology away. The most important part of this is you start asking people what makes you comfortable, and then they start telling you the stories, very much like sustainability. This will be human sustainability, which is, I want you for the long run. I don't want you for 3 months and then you go to the mental hospital because you have a breakdown because I made you work too hard. This was happening before we had COVID. Now with COVID, the only difference is digital. We waste so much time. We don't waste time commuting, but we waste time saying, is the audio working? You're on mute. Is the camera working? My internet died. Those things. Oh, the child ran into the room. The dog disconnected the phone. All of those things. We'll find a balance. Now, to find the balance, corporations must understand how do you become, a flexible organization. So my company, we're a venture fund, but we're a global venture fund. Zurich, Tel Aviv, Singapore, Uruguay, Brazil, Canada, United States, London, and Paris. There's no way before COVID, we're like once in 6 months, everybody gets together. We have a San Francisco somewhere, we have a party, we get together, everybody eats and all of that. Now what happens, we all sit together, and at some point we're like yesterday evening, I was talking to Paul, my partner in Canada. I said, I have Zoom fatigue. He said, what do you mean? I said, I'm closing my eyes, I'm talking to you on the phone, but I cannot get up and look in the camera anymore. I'm done. We have to create that balance. The other piece we have to be very careful about is young people. With young people whose brains are just developing, whose social habits are just developing, we have to instill good discipline. Okay, put the device away. Why? Because like I told a long time ago, remember, Jowita, we talked about this is digital cocaine. Every time you pick up the device, you say like, you say dislike, and then you're like, ooh, how many people said this? How many people are there? It's digital cocaine. We have to be careful about that because human sustainability, our longevity matters on separating ourselves from work and life and create balance. That's it.
Thank you so much, Cristina. Cristina, you're based in New York, so what's your point of view? Do you agree with what Suprit and Darius said? Do you have any additional insights?
Well, I have a little bit of a different view. So I think that technology has made us a lot more transactional in our conversations. And so you do have the ability to get a lot more done. I mean, so for those of us who had an extensive network of people that we've built relationships with, you can easily pick up, a Zoom and have a conversation and continue to have sort of transactional conversations. But one of the things that I think is a little bit challenging is kind of to Suprit's comments is that, first of all, the younger generation that's coming into the workforce doesn't necessarily have what I'd call to be sort of mentoring, right? Because it's the in-between conversations that enable you to learn a bit more about trends in the industry or opportunities. And that's a hard thing to do on Zoom. And so I think it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to continue to grow a career without having that in-person experience of being able to talk. So there are benefits to both in that you can be more transactional, but you made a point earlier about education being such an important part of the world that we live in. And, having the opportunity to not be traveling quite as much, because Suprit, I do understand the, traveling all over the world situation, which is fun. But, I wouldn't have written my book if it hadn't been for being in a lockdown, right? So
right.
I do think there is an opportunity to learn new subjects because we live in a world where you constantly have to be learning. And, there is the opportunity to, utilize the networks that you have in place and, build opportunities, because you can actually get a hold of somebody, and have a 30-minute Zoom call and actually, discuss ideas. So I think the technology has some positive aspects, but I do think that we're missing out on the non-transactional nature of, building out careers and organizations and exploring and innovating, which is basically the glue that helps us grow, pivot, and learn.
Right.
Thank you. Yes. I have to say I fully agree. Which leads us a bit to the next question, because as we talk about technology, we talk about the future, then business, but I'm like pretty sure that we need to talk about this soft things, like how we take care of our emotional emotions and feelings, and about who we are, what kind of culture do we build it. So my next question is, who are and how they act purpose-driven future leaders? Can you share your thoughts about? And Suprit, I'd like to ask you first.
So it is very interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting question, because I think to take what Christina was saying, if your system is all transactional, and in the next 2 years, let's assume that it's going to be transactional, how do you become purposeful, and how do you create intent where there is an emotional connection? People don't work for you for just money. They work because they're inspired, they're being led, you have a proper mission, you have a vision of the future that is real. It is so important. We have this big problem. In our own organization, small organization, what is our culture? Well, I give you a simple example. I'm always on time for my Zoom call. I'm usually early. Other people are not on time on the Zoom call. And how do you adjust that? This is a simple behavior, because if you're a physical location, you have to go to a conference room, most people will come on time, There's always the one person who's always late, but let's ignore them for a moment. But that person, you just say, okay, John is always late. You don't worry about it. But this kind of behavior, I was talking to some young students and a professor, and I was talking about classes, and he said, the hardest thing with university students, they show up. I got 34 blank screens. They say hi, they're texting each other, and they're doing all these other things. But in that, they're missing out this dialogue we're having, even though it's remote, this dialogue, this asking of questions and this agreement and disagreement, they're missing out the piece of learning that comes, because there's always an aha, And you may agree with me and you may disagree with me. And sometimes it's in the disagreement that we actually have more dialogue than we do when we agree, This human capacity for us to take a purpose, articulate it in a digital frontier. Now, in this digital frontier, what seems to always happen is we are speeding up productivity. We're not speeding up humanity. In order to create a purposeful vision, you have to speed up humanity too. So a very good example is, when you have so many days of vacation. When you're doing COVID, what is the meaning of vacation and non-vacation and all, right? What do you mean vacation? Well, I can't go anywhere. I can't see anybody. What vacation? I'm at home. I'm living in my pajamas. The top part of me looks professional. The bottom part of me is in pajamas with little furry slippers. So when you do that, then you have to. How do you create the dissonance and yet create purpose? So we start asking people, what's important to you? The most important question becomes, what's important to you? And you'll get this, like a bell curve of what's important. Some people really love the productivity game, and mostly they're introverts. Some people really miss meeting other people. Mostly they're extroverts, The first people to get vaccines were extroverts, because if I get a vaccine, I will be able to go see my friends. Oh my God, I need to see my friends. I'm going to die otherwise, And that is a balancing act. And the most important thing an executive can do, a leader can do, is start to listen. Start to really listen. Ask the questions about where's the pain, and develop an answer to find a solution to that. It may be technological. It may be, like we have on Fridays, we have Friday afternoon, nobody works. I told everybody, go away, don't work, don't call me, don't text me, don't do anything. I'm not available. What are you doing? I'm sleeping. I don't care. Do whatever you want, right? So that's really important.
Christina, can you add something to this? What do you think? Who should be a purpose-driven future leader? What do you think?
Well, I think that in order to be a purposeful, I think education is going to be key to that, because we live in such a complex world that I just realized that I wasn't sharing my slides when I was speaking. So I don't know if the appreciation for the complexity, the vectors in the world that we live in. We live in a connected world that's very, very complex now, and the connectivity between like people and organizations and communities and the data and the technology is so strong that and the technology is changing at the speed of light, and there's the ability to innovate and create better healthcare, and there's a lot of great potential that's coming out of this the fourth industrial revolution, but in order to make that technology useful, it has to incorporate people. The S in ESG is a very strong part of that innovation, the new business models that are starting to evolve. And so you can't really innovate that without really digging in and understanding what's going on in the culture, and what people's requirements are. You can't just sort of do that in an ivory tower. So there has to be a way of maintaining some of the efficiencies that technology has offered us from a transactional perspective, while still offering us that ability to continuously learn, and not just learn from a webinar, but to learn by having conversations and engaging. And I think that finding a hybrid version of that as a way forward for companies that are offering the opportunity for people to work from home and utilize that transactional capability. I think if you look at leaders today, it's the ones that can engage with people in order to be able to build those bridges and pivot and change, right? That human aspect is such a big part of being a leader and being able to communicate. It's one of the most essential parts about building a sustainable organization. You can have a great idea, but if you can't communicate it and have those conversations and connect, you're never going to build that influence and actually make that change happen. So I think that the leaders in the future are going to find a way to utilize both sides, but I think the emphasis on constantly learning and connecting with people, I think it's going to become probably more important than ever.
Thank you. Dariusz, Darek, you're one of the experts of modern work world. From your perspective.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to get back to what Saprit said about going in PJs and a jacket. What if this is the work-life balance of our times? This is where we're at. What is as good as it gets, I think regarding the leaders of the future, leaders of our times, we need to look back to the organizations that already have been working in the virtual mode, dispersed mode, leaderless mode, pretty much. I quite disagree with the fact that technology made us all transactional. And I know that Cristina didn't put it so 0-1, but I think there is a fine point to be made that technology also makes us more collaborative, more open, more willing to share, to contribute, more altruistic even. I recently wrote a book about the collaborative society with Alexandra Przegaliński, MIT Press. And one of the points we're making, basically in our research, is that people are actually using technology to help each other out, to be more oriented at non-transactional cooperative, non-transactional modalities. So in a way, I think if we look at the organizations that are good at it, and they have been good at it before the pandemic, open source, Wikimedia movement, we will see immediately that maybe there's something to the leaderless organization. Maybe there's something to self-organizing teams, but technology needs to be used to solve problems where that can be solved with technology better. And when we're talking about distance learning, all those classes with blank screen students doing something else, I think this is exactly the problem. Technology can make us all discuss together, but this is the benefit that needs to be non-negotiable. If you want to take the class, participate. And I don't care. You can be in the Bahamas, that's fine, but be with me in the spirit. Be with me with your mind. And with organizing, it goes the same way. If we want to use technology to cooperate, collaborate, make things happen together, we need to use it where it is good at. So, for example, we need to embed hardcore coffee breaks. We need to make sure that all those cooler and coffee machine conversations actually will happen. This should be by design. What about lunch breaks that we all eat together collectively in front of a screen? Yeah, sure. Maybe there is something to sharing a little bit of our house intimacy in the sense that, yeah, truth be told, yeah, I have a bowl of soup. I'm sitting in front of you, and we're not talking about work, but this is what humans need. We need human touch, human contact. And what really puzzles me, how is it possible that a vast majority of young Americans can use technology to start intimate contact, intimate relationships, that most of them actually meet their significant others by the use of technology, and we're unable somehow to make a much less significant relations happen in the workplace. So I think there's a huge gap, a huge potential that we're still unfulfilling, mainly because we assume, oh yeah, it can be done, or oh, it will pass, we'll get back to the office, and we will not. So we need to embrace technology where it's good at.
But I think that makes the relationship world a little bit more like transactional than that sort of meeting them in a crowd and that it's a much more transactional.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Yes, Christina. So let's go to another question. Let's go deeper into the leader's mind, and a little bit more practical, maybe. How leaders can help teams to adjust their thinking to strive for new knowledge, even despite the current obstacles, and how can they engage the community to create a proactive space? What do you think?
Great question. I would say that that's probably the hardest thing to accomplish remotely, right? Because I think that team building, obviously there are team building exercises and events, and there's a lot of activity that involves what I consider to be the less transactional part of a job in order to build those skills. Because there are obviously a lot of skills that you can build doing an online class. But I think that the team building and the culture, I think, is something that has to come from the leaders. And in my presentation, which I realized that I didn't share my slides, I make the point that governance and setting in the culture, that your how you embrace the people that you work with and how you communicate, that's part of a leader's job, is really to create that culture. And it's difficult to do in sort of a transactional format. You really have to get to know the people on the team, their strengths. For example, you may have somebody that is young that strives to learn new skills and be promoted into another job, and understanding, putting together not only sort of a path forward, but some recommendations and mentoring them, because otherwise, obviously everyone knows that a lot of young kids today stay in a job for 18 months and they burn out and they go somewhere else. In the cybersecurity space, you see that a lot, right? In the SOCs and in the security centers, they get burnt out from looking at these alerts. And if there isn't a path for them to take what they've learned within that environment and be able to do other things that add value to the organization, then once again, they act transactionally and they finish and they go off somewhere else. So I think that the human aspect of what people are looking to achieve and learn, and folding that in and aligning that with the company goals, because it has to align with the company goals in order for everybody to be going in the same direction. But I think that's something that I think that with this culture of 2 years or a year and a half on a job moving forward, it's been lost. In my day, my first job was at IBM, and we had it was known as having one of the best training programs in the world, right? And the consulting organizations and some of the investment banks were known as having those, but they don't have those anymore, right? So people come into these positions, and most of the time, people are hired for what they know, but not with the runway of what they can do if they learn. And so I think organizations have to really think about that runway and embrace where people, the potential that people have, and how to encourage them to grow so that they stay in the organization, because they're part of the intellectual property of an organization, whether they're working with a customer or writing code. And so when you have high turnover, that's problematic, not just for the for the leadership, but also for the organization and its growth as a whole, sustainability.
Thanks, Christina. Super, because we are losing you from time to time. I think there is poor connection in Houston. So let's give you a voice until we have you. How leaders can engage the community to create more proactive space from your perspective?
So, we set up something very interesting a couple of times there. So, I've managed very large organizations and very small organizations. Right now, it's a small organization, but large organizations is very interesting. We this concept of apprentice and mentor and mentee, of a senior person with a junior person, is not just about helping them go across, but the knowledge is then not just a transactional knowledge, but also a relational knowledge, and that knowledge allows it to, the relationship gets built. And we have this right now with a senior advisor with a new venture partner we have. And what they're learning is not just the mechanics, but also what goes around the mechanics. For doing one of these events, it's 10 hours of work for 1 hour of video, type of scenario. So that preparation, what's in the background, who do you have to talk to, how do you get people aligned, what are the key things we're going to do, what we're not going to do. And I think this is actually going to go against ageism, because finally people who are older and gray, like me, are going to be valued by the younger people, because, even though I'm a boomer, it becomes a value add proposition, because now I'm not just sharing the transaction item, I'm also sharing the why, the how, the who, the what. And that becomes you can then connect that to a mission, a long-term mission. So even though it's small steps, if you do that, then you're basically, older person, younger person, apprentice. In the old day, the magician didn't become a super magician until they have an apprentice. And then you have apprentice and they come together, eventually creating more magic. I think work will be like that too, creating magic.
Thanks. Darek, you're also teaching. So maybe you use some tips and hints and you can share with us. And you have the last voice, because unfortunately, we're coming to an end. So
yeah, well, it's a huge responsibility. I don't know. But honestly, I think Saprit nailed it. I mean, it's all about experiencing a conversation. Teaching has zero value if it's just throwing knowledge at people. Knowledge in libraries is free. Go read a book if you feel like it.
You have to say it to all the teachers in Poland at primary schools.
Yeah, but what can I say? I mean, doesn't make any sense, just throwing stuff. YouTube is free. It's not a process of learning. It's about a conversation. It's about disagreeing. It's about solving problems together. It's about looking in the same direction in the same time. So from that point of view, technology is great. quite honestly. But we need to change culture. The culture of experiencing it is unfortunately broken. We all are used to attending boring meetings, and especially at corporations, it's a nightmare. Most meetings that are happening contain people that should not be there. Their time is entirely wasted. So what happens when we turn online? Everybody's happy because they can just minimize the screen and do their actual work. The risk with that is that the asynchronicity, the losing of this perception of being in the same reality together, and especially in learning, especially at university learning and at any workshop, it's crucial that we are in this together with our minds. This is the only tool that is working there. This is the muscle we're developing. So from this point of view, I don't care about technology per se. It could be polls. We could use agile technologies and tools for good purposes, but ultimately down to business, it's medieval. We're all participating in a conversation. We do not need tools. We need minds. And to use this, to be able to use rhetorics, to be exchanging views. We can use technology when it's useful, but we should not assume that technology is solving anything on its own. It's not. If anything, it is encouraging people. It's a temptation to minimize and still get it all. You will not get it all. You will get nothing. You will waste your time. You will probably not do your work that you're doing as effectively when somebody's yapping in the background. So you will lose on both fronts. My best advice to my students is don't attend my lecture if you don't want to participate. Doesn't make any sense. Only come if you're going to be there 100%. And this is, I think, where we all need to be going, and we all need to get to this level of understanding that maybe it's better to have less lectures, but be in them in full commitment, full participation.
Wow, thank you so much. And we see so many likes of our talk. I'm happy to see that. Summarizing in one sentence, the new world disorder is coming and will stay with us for a while. So we need completely new tools, and we need disruption in every single aspect of our lives and businesses. So let's leave our audience with this. And again, thank you so much for attending our session. Reach to us. As you can see, we have a lot of tips and hints, and we cover a lot of topics. Thank you so much, Christina, Darek, and Suprit. Again, it was a great pleasure to host this talk. Thank you so much.
You.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.